out of hospital care and to make sure that people can stay in their own homes and communities. And my second aim will be to ensure there's greater accountability to the people of Telford and Wrekin for health services in this area.
Over the next 12 months, I shall be protecting green spaces and natural environment, working towards tackling climate change and also improving our parks and play areas.
Over the next 12 months, we will begin to implement our manifesto, a vision to protect, to invest and care in Telford Wrekin, the place that we call home, creating a better borough for those who live here, work here and visit, making Telford Wrekin a special place.
My priorities for the forthcoming year are to work with our contractors Viola, Ida Verde and Balfour Beatty on making our borough cleaner and greener. I will also look to lobby government for more investment into our roads and footpaths and work with Viola on recycling to increase recycling across the borough and look at other opportunities.
My vision for my role as part of the Telford Wrekin Cabinet is to ensure that we continue to provide the financial bedrock upon which everything else that the council does can be built, whether that's investment in infrastructure, attracting new jobs to the town, good quality homes for residents, or investment into services for residents right across our communities, including services that protect the most vulnerable within our community.
I will be ensuring we deliver on our manifesto, which is to protect, care and invest for all children and young people throughout Telford and Wrekin. It is vital that we protect all our young people and we ensure they have all the educational opportunities that they need. We will be investing heavily in new education facilities to ensure that we can inspire all our young people to reach their true potential. I will be ensuring that I am the voice for all the young people in Telford and Wrekin, and I will ensure that that voice is heard.
I want to focus on quality in the work that we do in relation to housing, transport and infrastructure. I think we've got a fantastic opportunity here to build superb quality homes for the future, to generate a transport system that works for all of our residents and to service that with high quality infrastructure with the very best design. People who live in this town deserve the best, and people who work in this town deserve the best. People who want to locate their businesses here deserve the best. I think we can achieve that if we work together across the council and in partnership with other organisations. Telford's got a bright future. Let's make it happen.
My priorities for the coming year will be to continue to develop our relationships with our voluntary sector and the town and parish councils because they're so important to what we do, to provide a leisure and culture offering to our residents that's affordable and meets their needs, and finally to offer great customer services to everyone out there.
Over the next 12 months, I'll be strengthening partnership working to protect the Ironbridge Gorge World Heritage Site and also working with community groups across the borough to celebrate the rich heritage we have here. We'll also be developing our tourism offer so that we can sell the very best of what Telford and Wrekin has to offer as a great place to live, work and visit.
This year I want to carry on with my Building Bridges project I launched when I was the mayor. So I want to go out to the more wider community and build on community cohesion.
My vision for the next year for health and adult social care in Telford and Wrekin is to continue and to further the excellent work that's been done with partners in the area around out of hospital care and to make sure that people can stay in their own homes and communities. And my second aim will be to ensure there's greater accountability to the people of Telford and Wrekin for health services in this area.
Over the next 12 months, I shall be protecting green spaces and natural environment, working towards tackling climate change and also improving our parks and play areas.
Over the next 12 months, we will begin to implement our manifesto, a vision to protect, to invest and care in Telford Wrekin, the place that we call home, creating a better borough for those who live here, work here and visit, making Telford Wrekin a special place.
My priorities for the forthcoming year are to work with our contractors Viola, Ida Verde and Balfour Beatty on making our borough cleaner and greener. I will also look to lobby government for more investment into our roads and footpaths and work with Viola on recycling to increase recycling across the borough and look at other opportunities.
My vision for my role as part of the Telford Wrekin cabinet is to ensure that we continue to provide the financial bedrock upon which everything else that the council does can be built, whether that's investment in infrastructure, attracting new jobs to the town, good quality homes for residents, or investment into services for residents right across our communities, including services that protect the most vulnerable within our community.
I will be ensuring we deliver on our manifesto, which is to protect, care and invest for all children and young people throughout Telford and Wrekin. It is vital that we protect all our young people and we ensure they have all the educational opportunities that they need. We will be investing heavily in new education facilities to ensure that we can inspire all our young people to reach their true potential. I will be ensuring that I am the voice for all the young people in Telford and Wrekin, and I will ensure that that voice is heard.
I want to focus on quality in the work that we do in relation to housing, transport and infrastructure. I think we've got a fantastic opportunity here to build superb quality homes for the future, to generate a transport system that works for all of our residents and to service that with high quality infrastructure with the very best design. People who live in this town deserve the best, and people who work in this town deserve the best. People who want to locate their businesses here deserve the best. I think we can achieve that if we work together across the council and in partnership with other organisations. Telford's got a bright future. Let's make it happen.
My priorities for the coming year will be to continue to develop our relationships with our voluntary sector and the town and parish councils because they're so important to what we do, to provide a leisure and culture offering to our residents that's affordable and meets their needs, and finally to offer great customer services to everyone out there.
Over the next 12 months, I'll be strengthening partnership working to protect the Ironbridge Gorge World Heritage Site and also working with community groups across the borough to celebrate the rich heritage we have here. We'll also be developing our tourism offer so that we can sell the very best of what Telford and Wrekin has to offer as a great place to live, work and visit.
This year I want to carry on with my Building Bridges project I launched when I was the mayor. So I want to go out to the more wider community and build on community cohesion.
My vision for the next year for health and adult social care in Telford and Wrekin is to continue and to further the excellent work that's been done with partners in the area around out of hospital care, and to make sure that people can stay in their own homes and communities. And my second aim will be to ensure there's greater accountability to the people of Telford and Wrekin for health services in this area.
Over the next 12 months, I shall be protecting green spaces and natural environment, working towards tackling climate change and also improving our parks and play areas.
Over the next 12 months, we will begin to implement our manifesto, a vision to protect, to invest and care in Telford Wrekin, the place that we call home, creating a better borough for those who live here, work here and visit, making Telford Wrekin a special place.
My priorities for the forthcoming year are to work with our contractors Viola, Ida Verde and Balfour Beatty on making our borough cleaner and greener. I will also look to lobby government for more investment into our roads and footpaths and work with Viola on recycling to increase recycling across the borough and look at other opportunities.
My vision for my role as part of the Telford Wrekin cabinet is to ensure that we continue to provide the financial bedrock upon which everything else that the council does can be built, whether that's investment in infrastructure, attracting new jobs to the town, good quality homes for residents, or investment into services for residents right across our communities, including services that protect the most vulnerable within our community.
I will be ensuring we deliver on our manifesto, which is to protect, care and invest for all children and young people throughout Telford and Wrekin. It is vital that we protect all our young people and we ensure they have all the educational opportunities.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Telford and Wrekin's full council meeting. I'll hand you over to our illustrious speaker for proceedings to begin.
Right, thank you. Prayers. Can I invite Councillor... Sorry, not Councillor yet. No, he is. You're parish councillor, aren't you? No longer. Oh, well. I'll start again. Can I introduce the Reverend Keith Osmond-Smith to do prayers? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. After the last meeting, I noticed on the YouTube video that was made of it that one or two people said, he's going on a bit, isn't he? And they were talking about my prayers. So I've taken the feedback and I'm going to reduce the length of time tonight. But I will mention the things that I might have prayed for if I had time. And that's 40,000 nurses that we need, the food implications if we don't do something about climate change, the potential for disaster with the dark web, and perhaps even today, wars and rumours of wars in the Middle East, and that which affects us here as well in Telford. The number of deaths through homelessness has now reached 449 at the end of last year. That's across the UK, with 320,000 people sleeping rough. But I'm not going to mention them any further. Let's be still. Almighty God, it is our prayer that as the warm summer months are ending and autumn draws nearer, that this council returns refreshed and renewed and more than ready for the weeks and months that lie ahead and prepared for the many challenges that already lie in wait in our borough. We live in uncertain times, both nationally and internationally, where single issues divide nations, leading to hatred and enmity. Even in our own land, we see the discomfort, the anger and the dismay that recent years have brought forward. To our cost, now and in the future, issues like climate change, the NHS, care for the elderly, for our young people, and so many other important matters have been sidelined in some ways and neglected and laid aside by self-interested agendas. So to be still in these moments is much more than to be quiet or to simply keep silence. It is time to take the opportunity to reflect and critically think about our parts, our roles, the things that we might do, some perhaps as yet unknown, to bring about the peace and quiet enjoyment that we've lost. Tonight, in our stillness, can we know once more a simple, warming peace, and in this moment grant us the resolve to use all of our lives more effectively in the life of service that we follow. And we pray for this meeting and for the agenda set before us tonight. Please give an assurance of what is pleasing to you and what would benefit those who live and work in and around our borough of Telford and Wrekin. And in this we ask for courage and compassion aplenty. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Right. Thank you, Padre. Right, we now move on to item 2, apologies. Do you want to read them out?
Apologies from Councillors Karen Blundell, Eric Carter, Thomas Yanker, Gemma Offland, Jane Pinter, Peter Scott and Karen Tomlinson. Right. Are there any further apologies? Yes, Councillor Cook?
I'm going to have to leave early, I've got other commitments.
Yes, he has another commitment, he has to leave early. Right. Any further apologies? Right, thank you. Any declarations of interest? No? Yes. That's right. Jonathan Eatoff and Jonathan Rowe will leave the meeting at the item 9, is it? Yeah, which we're going to bring forward. I'll come to that later. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. I'd asked if there are any other declarations, aren't there? Right. Can we move on to minutes of the council? Moved as a true record. Seconded. Is that agreed? Right, thank you. Proposed and seconded, agreed. Mayor to sign the minutes, have you done all that?
I will do.
Okay, you do that while I invite the leader to address the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a very busy summer for the Council, where we've really started to embed and focus on our plans for the next 4 years to protect, care and invest to create a better borough.
That's what I said, wasn't it? 9.
The last 8 years have created a great base for us to build upon. But there's so much more we want to do and so much more our community want us to do. One of our commitments has been to keep up the fight to protect services at the Princess Royal Hospital. In the summer, I gave evidence to the independent review panel looking into the referral to the Health Secretary over future fit and the proposals to downgrade our hospital. Despite the Secretary of State having all of the information since the beginning of August, he still has not made a decision and he's reluctant to make a decision. I wonder why. I urge the Health Secretary to make a decision because the people of our town, the people of our borough, deserve to know. Equally, the government is dragging its heels on another issue that we have repeatedly lobbied over the last 2 years, the issue of cross-border hiring of private hire vehicles. In this borough, as elsewhere, there are very real concerns about the public safety which could be addressed with stronger powers to the council and deregulation that the government introduced being reversed. Yet again, the government appears to be deaf to this issue, despite us raising it time and time again. I asked the Health Secretary to ensure that he does not do what his predecessors have done, which is fail to act. Mr. Speaker, the government in chaos, but at the same time, a council that is eager to progress change. These are just 2 examples how we've been trying to create a better borough. There are so many other different ways that we are taking control to create a borough that has this goal firmly at the top of the agenda. In the last few weeks, we have significantly advanced our plans to improve the environment. We are already working with a range of partners to reduce single-use plastics, both inside the council and within the community, building on the great work of community groups across the borough, including those in Newport and Madeley. In fact, last week, Newport was awarded a plastic-free community status from a national organisation. This is a fantastic achievement, and we hope to support and replicate this across the borough, and I know there's fantastic work taking place in Wellington and elsewhere. At the start of this month, we launched our food waste household collection service. It's a service that we recognise does divide opinions, but I'm delighted to say that the initial results show householders find this relatively simple, with many people telling us it's the right thing to do. The first week of the operation, we recycled 87 tonnes of food waste. That's enough to boil the kettle 370,000 times and make 2 million cups of tea. Thank you to all our residents who have bared with us as we have started that new service. Talking of achievements, this council was the first ever council in the country to apply a banning order to a rogue landlord. This is a fantastic achievement of Richard Overton, the Deputy Leader of the Council, takes a lead on this agenda, but also our enforcement officers, our solicitors and all officers across the piece. We've sent a very clear message to landlords. We want to work with good landlords, but we will not hesitate to act against those landlords who are bad for residents, bad for tenants and bad for our community. Mr. Speaker, creating a better borough is not simply about facilities and infrastructure, it's also about people's health and well-being. Throughout the summer, we've worked with a huge range of community groups to get thousands of more people involved in physical activity through our Let's Get Telford Active scheme. From walks to rounders, cricket to netball, we've been encouraging local people to feel the physical and social benefits of being more active. Finally, we've also been helping those through running a series of holiday clubs for children who sometimes struggle to receive a warm breakfast during the summer holidays. In my own ward, Mr. Speaker, over 700 children were assisted over the 6 weeks holiday, which is something to be really proud about. The fact that this council protects and cares for the most vulnerable in our borough, but isn't it sad that in 2019, Mr. Speaker, there are children during a 6 weeks holiday who have to rely on such provisions. Mr. Speaker, this administration will continue to work hard to protect, care and invest and make our borough the place that we call home an even better place to live, work and visit. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I just said that we're bringing item 9 forward. In fact, I'm reminded it's item 10 we're bringing forward. We'll come to that. Right, I invite the Mayor to address the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's the Borough Mayor.
Thank you all for your continued support for this important role that I endeavour to fulfil to the best of my ability, ensuring that we all celebrate all that is great about Telford and Wrekin. As you can see from my mayoral engagement schedule, both myself and my Deputy Mayor have been busy attending a varied and diverse number of events right across the borough, including the Holly Project, the first anniversary, and the opening of Victoria House on behalf of the YMCA in Wellington, both of which will benefit from my mayoral charity. I really hope that you agree that these are very worthwhile causes and will support me tomorrow night at the launch of my mayoral charity taking place at Wellington Methodist Church at 7 o'clock tomorrow. So that it's short and sweet this month, but thank you for your continued support.
Okay. Right, and we note your very, very busy mayoral engagements list. Thank you. Right, public questions, there's been none received. Right, I now bring forward item 10, which is the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel, and I invite Professor Steve Leach to present his report.
Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, I see a lot of familiar faces, and that's because 17 of you were prepared to give up your time and come and give evidence to the panel. We really appreciated that. It's a lot more than I've often experienced as chairs of other panels, and we couldn't have written the report without your contribution. I'd also like to say that the panel was genuinely impressed with the proactive nature of Telford and Wrekin as a council. And I think there are various ways in which we thought, yes, this is a council that's going places, which again sadly can't be said of all the councils I've operated as chair of the allowances panel. Just wanted to start by saying that I was chair of the panel that was brought together in 2010. That panel was brought together for a specific purpose. It was the start of austerity. We all remember that, don't we? Sadly, it's still with us, or maybe it's still with us. Nobody seems too sure. And the panel was clear that in those circumstances, the general recommendation of no net increase in members' allowances was appropriate. And that was indeed what the council itself wanted. So our report basically did a bit of juggling around, but didn't increase members' allowances, which I'm sure was right at the time. Since then, over a 9-year period, members' allowances in Telford and Wrekin have been frozen in a situation where most other authorities that I've been involved with have increased allowances year by year on the basis of the officers' pay settlement. And that's typically been 1%, 2%, once nothing at all, more recently 3%. But overall, it meant that the officers' pay increased by roughly 8% over this 9-year period. So you didn't even do that. The level of abstinence which you showed in Telford and Wrekin was, I thought, the panel thought, thoroughly commendable. But the panel was also clear that it was timely to reassess whether this policy should continue, and it concluded that it should not. Various reasons that I'll try and skim through fairly quickly for you. First of all, the panel was committed to the case for designing an allowances system which maximised the feasibility of a wide range of people standing for councillors. Okay, that was always seemed to me, as chair of various panels, to be something which the allowances system should be trying to do. Obviously, the recruitment of a wide range and variety of councillors doesn't just depend on members' allowances, but members' allowances can make a significant contribution. Secondly, the panel was aware that over the past few years, probably earlier, The pressures on members of all types, had quite clearly increased, you know, in Telford and Wrekin as elsewhere, but probably more so in Telford and Wrekin because of the amount of development taking place. So here's some of the things that the panel felt were helping to increase the pressures on you as members. The growth in the borough's population and all the development pressures that are involved or associated with that. The challenges of managing austerity, which is always more difficult than when resources are flowing rather more freely into council offices or coffers. Hard to remember those days, but they did exist many years ago. The increased scope and demand of partnership working, which I know you're very active in. I know you have associations with the Combined Authority in the West Midlands, where one of my more difficult jobs as chair of a panel was to recommend what the elected mayor should receive in that particular authority. The panel also heard an argument which we found quite convincing, that because of the cutbacks you've had to make in staffing, which I think you've done very responsibly in Telford and Wrekin, the implication of that is that members have had to do more for themselves, particularly perhaps in relation to overview and scrutiny, where I think your support team has understandably been reduced, although your reputation for overview and scrutiny has always been extremely high. So there's that. And then something that affects all of you, and that's the increased use of social media. Affects both councillors at executive level and at constituency level. The time needed to respond to such communications is growing. The expectation that you will respond quickly is increasing. Various members said to us, it's feeling increasingly like a 24/7 job. And I can well understand that in relation to the technological revolution we've all experienced. So there were 5 reasons why we felt the pressures on your time had been increasing. Other reasons for moving away from the standstill or the limited increases. Because of your policy of abstinence over the past 9 years, the real value of your allowances taken as an entity has decreased by 20% was our best estimate. We looked at various indications of what the drop in the value of members' allowances, and 20% seemed to be the best average we could find. So whatever your allowances were worth in 2010, they are now worth 20% less. That is unsustainable, particularly given what I've just said about the increasing demands and pressures on your time and your increasing responsibilities. We looked at comparative data for the authorities in the family to which you are typically compared, and the table of allowances, comparative table of allowances, is on page 13 under 2.3. We compared you with the authorities in your comparative group, with Shropshire, with Herefordshire, which you adjoin, share the enterprise board with, and the West Midlands Metropolitan District Councils, excluding Birmingham, which everybody knows is totally untypical. And what we found was that you were well below the average for pretty well all the allowances. So basically, what you were paying your leader, your deputy leader, your cabinet members, your basic allowance was significantly below what lots of authorities that are similar to you were paying. And that's basically unfair, isn't it? Why should you be getting, 3,000 or 4,000 less as members than they're getting in Wigan or Kirklees or wherever you happened to be compared with? So we felt that that was another good reason for the panel to say, we need to do something about this. We need to get some greater level of parity in what you're receiving in terms of allowances compared with what other authorities are receiving. In principle, there's a case for recommending, the panel felt there was a case for recommending a increase of greater than 20%, given the fact that that simply restores the value of what you were getting 9 years ago, and you're all doing more than you were doing 9 years ago. But given that, we're still living, as far as I can see, in a period of austerity, we felt that it was perhaps pushing it too far at this stage to move beyond that. although if conditions improve, there would certainly be a case for the panel recommending an increase, if you see what I mean. And remember, what we're recommending, 20% sounds a lot. Basically, what we're recommending is that we return to the value of your allowances 9 years ago. Right, the specific allowances, I'm happy to answer questions on them, but most allowances, excluding the basic, including the special responsibility allowances, the 20% figure is applied, with some minor exceptions. So, for example, we've juggled around with the allowances for the leader and deputy leader, because looking at the comparative data, the deputy leader does pretty well compared with other authorities, the leader much less so. So I hope that's uncontroversial. Similarly with scrutiny committees, what you pay chairs of scrutiny committees much closer to the average of your comparable authorities than many of your other positions. And what the panel felt there, as somebody who's done a lot of work on overview and scrutiny, I put a comment in our 2010 report that it's healthy if scrutiny chairs are shared amongst different parties, which I don't think you do in Telford and Wrekin. I think there's a case for that, but that goes beyond the remit of our report. I accept that. But given the comparability data, we thought 10% was right for an increase for chairs of scrutiny panels, with the exception of the Scrutiny Management Board, where it was clear that this was a much more high-profile position than it had been some time in the past, and we felt the 20% increase was relevant for that particular position. There were then a lot of other minor but still important positions where we were asked to make recommendations. Again, I'm happy to answer questions on the thinking behind any of these, but just to say briefly, the evidence we heard suggested that the audit committee was perhaps doing less than it has done in the past, and that there wasn't the same kind of case for increasing the allowance for the chair of that committee, although I'm sure it still does valuable work. We were asked to consider the case for a special responsibility allowance for the chairs of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the the Boundary Committee, the Boundary Something Committee. Both cases we felt there was a case for applying an SRA, and we recommended made recommendations to that effect. Both bodies are doing significant and important work, and that needs to be recognised. So to some extent, the panel was having to think on its feet and make judgments about the particular level of allowances for these sort of more minor but still important roles. We had to rely heavily on what councillors and officers told us about the significance of these roles. There didn't appear to be any or many job descriptions around we could use. So we did our best, and hopefully we produced some recommendations which at least you would see as being reasonable. Various other things we were asked to look at as a panel. I see in the papers that you are going to consider the allowances of mayor and deputy mayor, which technically isn't a role for a special response for a panel. It's something separate to that. But the point we wanted to make in the report very forcibly is that it shouldn't, anyone fulfilling the role of mayor or deputy mayor should not be out of pocket. So, you know, if there is somebody on a low income who would make an eminently sort of sensible, acceptable mayor, but thinks, no, if I'm going to have to shell out money, I really can't afford it, that shouldn't be the situation. So I think the recommendation that you've made sort of to the side of the panel's recommendations of applying the 20% increase to mayor and deputy mayor allowances certainly makes sense to us. It's consistent, and I think we applaud that. We're suggesting that until it's clear that austerity is over and the government stops specifying what officers should get paid, that the NJC Scale Officers Award should be used as the updating criteria year by year. That's what most authorities do. That seems sensible. If ever things change fundamentally, the panel will be looking at a more cost of living increase, you know, one of the cost of living indices, but not just yet, I think. We recommend the use of the hourly living wage for childcare and dependent adult carers allowances on the basis that one way you can certainly help motivate people to stand for councils is if the allowances for people in these sort of positions are relatively generous. And similarly, when we were asked to look at parental leave, and we found the, I think it's a Labour Party document entitled Parental Leave Policy for Councils, that made sense to us. So our recommendation would be that the council adopts that. The details are set out in the report if you want to go into that later. If you wanted to backdate the allowances, that would be perfectly acceptable to the panel. You're halfway through municipal year. You've got a panel in place as soon as you reasonably could. We'd have no objection to that. And just one or 2 points in conclusion. The overall cost implications of our recommendations, which are considered in the background report to our report, involve, as you would expect, round about 20% increase on the current allowances figure. That seems to us to be a totally acceptable cost of democracy, particularly that it represents 0.175% of the council's total revenue budget. Also, in terms of, you know, what that actually means for what allowances you get as councillors, one of the principles which the panel adopted was that, most panels do quite rightly, is that a significant chunk of your work as councillors should rightly be regarded as voluntary. You're not here to make a lot of money. You will never make a lot of money being a councillor. You're here because you want to do a good job for your local people or your local party or some combination of those things. So the usual criteria that panels use is that 50% of members' time should be seen as voluntary and 50% should be seen as rightly appropriate for remuneration, depending on the responsibilities of the job. Now, given what we were told about the amount of time which you put in, either as constituency members without a formal position or as members of the executive or chairs of a particular committee, typically people said, as kind of constituency councillors, for want of a better word, it's round about 20-25 hours a week. If you're talking about members of the executive, leaders, deputy leaders, it was more like 30 to 35 hours a week, which is approaching a full-time job, isn't it? If you take off the 50% of the councillor's time, which the panel are saying shouldn't be eligible for payment, then what you are actually getting, if you're a constituency member, is £16 an hour for the time that is susceptible to allowances, £28 an hour if you're one of the senior members on executive. Which seems pretty paltry, doesn't it, for the significance of the work you do, but given the way members' allowances have changed over the years, it's probably the best we could do. And just to end with the final quote in the report, which I think the panel felt very strongly, councillors are responsible for running a multi-million-pound enterprise. In the panel's view, this is the right time to acknowledge the value of the roles they play and to update and upgrade the allowances they receive. Councillors shouldn't undervalue themselves. They play a fantastically important role in our democracy in the wider sense. And the panel was clear that in Telford and Wrekin, this is the time to acknowledge that in a way that's not been possible over the past 7 or 8 years. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Leach. Professor Leach has to leave shortly to catch a train, but are there any questions before he goes? No, you've obviously done a good job then in explaining it. Okay. Right, thank you very much, Professor. Right, so we now move on to, are there any proposers?
Mr. Speaker, as the Cabinet member responsible for democratic services, it falls to me to propose some resolutions in respect of this report. First of all, can I start on behalf of all of us, I'm sure, to thank the panel themselves, recommendation 2.3, Professor Leach, Graham Wynne and Carlo Hart in regards to their work in regards to this panel. Mr. Speaker, the reality of the situation is that everybody in this room knows that this has not been a priority for the Council for quite some time, and that's why under the Labour administration, when we came to power in 2011, this has not been something that we have brought forward to the Council, despite the legal advice that we should bring it to council. But, Mr. Speaker, it's important also that we balance that against a situation where we encourage an inclusive nature of allowing candidates and councillors to come forward, particularly the younger members, particularly those with family commitments and particularly those with jobs, because I know that there's a number of members from right across the groups that take significant amounts of time either off work to do this work, or they ensure that their work patterns are such that they can then work around their commitments to the council. And Mr. Speaker, I think, of course, it's not popular to talk about allowances, but there's a general principle that we've asked an independent panel to assess this. I would have much preferred the law to be that an independent panel comes, they make a judgment, and we have to either, it's imposed upon us, but that isn't the law. The law requires us to make a decision, which is always difficult to start to value your own time. So, Mr. Speaker, on the basis that the independent panel have come to these conclusions independently, having heard from members from views from right across the board, my recommendation, as set out in the report at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and in respect of 2.4, my recommendation is that we pick up the point at paragraph 4.11 in regards to those allowances to go alongside the increase with the basic allowance, which would seem eminently sensible as set out by the Professor to us. Mr. Speaker, I anticipate that this is not something that's going to tax the council much again over the next few years, but I hope that we do have a little bit of grown-up politics in regards to this, and that we can come together to get behind what the panel has suggested for all the right reasons.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Right, Councillor Overton, second. Any other comments? Yes, Councillor.
Oh, dear me. Thank you, Chair. All members who are present will be acutely aware of the amount of time involved in the discharge of our duties as borough councillors. And as an elected member with no less than 7 parishes to serve, I am rarely left without a hefty casework load. I'm acutely aware, however, that I could not discharge my responsibilities without the dedicated support and hard work of the council's employees and officers. It may well have been almost a decade since members' allowances were last reviewed, but we are all aware that this period has also seen a great restriction in remuneration increases for our employees at all levels, the average of which across the range falls somewhat short of 20%. It is not my place to question the recommendations made by the independent review panel. Suffice to say that I would rather it had spent a little less time comparing allowances for members of this council with those of members of other councils, and rather more time in comparing the recommended uplift for members of this council with those afforded to this council's employees over the same time frame. I am, however, very pleased to note the recommendation that in the future, increases in members' allowances will be linked to the median percentage of remuneration increases offered to the hard-working and dedicated staff of this council. That seems only fair, Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. Bill Thomas. I need the faces to remove.
Right, thank you, Speaker. I don't know if Stephen Leach is still here or if he's gone. I'm not sure. He's still here. I've got to say, we've known each other for some considerable time, going way back to when scrutiny first started here. And I have to say about Professor Leach that I have the utmost of time and respect for him. I've read the Remuneration Panel's report and fully understand the rationale of their proposals and also their associated comments. And I would like to thank all 3 members for their time and trouble in meeting with local councillors and considering our views. As for my thoughts on their findings, I agree that a councillor's basic allowance should be increased, but feel more comfortable if that had been more in line with the 8% increase to officers' pay since 2010. However, we are talking about a percentage increase on a much smaller base level. Perhaps surprisingly to some here, on reflection, I also agree with the increased SRA for the leader of the council. I know full well the stress, strains and responsibilities of that job, which can also amount to a 40 to 60-hour week if it's done properly. I also support the argument that some cabinet posts are much more demanding in time and much more responsibility that goes with those positions than some other cabinet positions. However, the panel has chosen not to incorporate that thought without further consideration. However, there are cumulatively large amounts of money coming out of the public purse, and quite rightly, the public will wish to see value for money for SRAs and council expenses and allowances. Consequently, one issue which was not pursued by the panel was the removal of travel and subsistence allowance from those receiving larger SRAs. Now, I do believe that the recipients of such special responsibility allowances should pay for their own travel and food out of that allowance when undertaking council duties, rather than claim it on top or have the council pay directly for it. However, let me continue with what I do support, and those are allowances for the Speaker, you'll be pleased to know. I think indeed it is. And I think that's quite an onerous and quite an important job as well, and I'm sure you will strike a very fair and balanced approach to it. I also support an SRA for the Health and Wellbeing Board, and note that that's chaired elsewhere, or at least by a cabinet member. But I think that's a very important committee for this local authority. I also think and agree with the increased SRA for the chairman of the planning committee, whose workload is by and large way and above that of many other chairmen. Let me now turn to the issue of scrutiny, if I can, and what Stephen mentioned. I strongly agree with the comments of the review panel that this council's approach is now unusual and not best practice. I've a lot of time for Professor Leach, who was involved, as I said, in scrutiny here from the very beginning, and he later had to rewrite the council's constitution for us. This authority needs to drag itself into the modern world and accept the value of having opposition members leading and chairing scrutiny. The council's executive should be mature enough to be able to consider alternative views and accept the challenge and the support that scrutiny can bring. Speaker, for 3 out of the 4 years between 2007 and 2011, we appointed a Labour member to head up scrutiny, and we welcomed that challenge. I now accept that perhaps that wasn't enough. However, while we operate a leader in cabinet model, we must ensure that we have a strong scrutiny alongside the executive as a critical friend. Currently, this council operates at a democratic deficit. Its view of scrutiny is somewhat archaic for what really should be a forward-looking organisations. In many respects, the challenge of operating in an alternative way is just as difficult as the many other challenges which we face and have to deal with such challenges. I think that we should do that together and look at those challenges, accept the help of scrutiny, put it where there is a real challenge with opposition members, and let's go forward together as an authority. Thank you for your forbearance.
Right, thank you. Right, but yes, of course, yes. I did have you written down. Councillor Tomlinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say it is a coincidence that I am standing here on my own tonight, and if the national position does get repeated and any one of you want to come along and join my group, I'll be very welcome, actually. Right, to the panel, I agree with most of what the remuneration panel has come forward with, and I also understand the comments that Councillor Reid has made. The one that I would also like to echo, which I know is strictly not part of the panel, which is in there, is also the scrutiny chairs. I think the Conservative group took them away to start with, and then the Labour administration carried on that practice, and I think it should go back to where we used to be, where these chairs of the various scrutiny committees are shared out amongst the whole group. To hold the executive to account from a public perspective, it doesn't look so good when it's the administration who appoint all those chairs. That doesn't lead people to think the executive is being kept to account. So I would echo those views, although not strictly part of the remuneration panel. But overall, I would accept the points raised and recommendations of the remuneration panel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments before I call on the Leader? No. Leader, would you like to reply?
Speaker, thank you for the tone from members on this debate. I think it's really important that the tone has been as it has been. Just a couple of points, I think, just in response to those representations being made by those speakers. The first of all, I've got to say that members of the Cabinet do not claim expenses, actually. And if you look at the published expenses since 2011, Cabinet members either have not or have very rarely claimed expenses, and certainly not for travel within the borough. So hopefully that can be of reassurance to Councillor Reid, who makes the point in respect of that. I don't think the same can be said to be true with the Cabinet that Andrew was the leader of. So I think that things have moved on somewhat. I'd also like to encourage members as well to consider expenses even on those who are on basic allowances, because I know that there are a number of councillors, predominantly, if not exclusively, from the Conservative group, who claim travel to the council meeting from their home address, who also claim expenses from their home address to their surgery. And that can be seen in the report that from the last council meeting, where, for example, a number of councillors claimed expenses for such things. I think in this day and age, members of the public wouldn't expect us to claim for travelling to effectively our point of work. And I'm happy to circulate the details of that to all members if you want me to. In regards to scrutiny panels, Mr. Speaker, we have 36 members of this council, and we have some very talented members of the council. The scrutiny chairs, without fear or favour, hold this administration to account. And as Councillor Tomlinson quite rightly says, before 2007, we did operate a system, I'm told, where scrutiny chairs were cross-party, but that was replaced when Councillor Reid was the leader of the council. And I think that for the reasons that he must have seen was valid, are reasons that we can continue the same process as today. Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important to say that members of the opposition parties can hold this administration to account. Unlike some councils, we invite both the leader of the opposition and the minority party to our cabinet. That isn't something that happens elsewhere. We're cross-party on a political weighting basis on every committee of the council, and including an agenda item later on today, the appointment of the chief executive was done on a basis that both opposition leaders were included. So I think we are absolutely democratic, but I would encourage members, whether or not they are the chair or not, to ensure that they engage with scrutiny, because it's an appropriate way in which we can be held to account. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the tone of the debate, as I say, and I've already moved the recommendations.
Right, thank you. We will now move to the vote. The recommendations are set out in the report, page 22. All right, can I ask for indication of all those in favour, please? That is unanimous. Those against? Sorry? Not unanimous, no. Those against? None against. The motion is passed. Thank you. Yes? Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It's passed. There's no record. It says passed.
It's passed. Thank you. Right. We now go back to agenda item 8. Cabinet decisions made since the last meeting. So I ask the leader whether the Cabinet has any comments on matters covered. No comments. Any questions or points of clarifications from the members? Yes, Councillor? I can't remember their name.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just got a couple of questions on the procurement update on the cabinet business.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. K2 2.1.2. I just want to confirm there's on the procurements there's the replacement of some fleet buses, and I just want that to be confirmed that they will either be hybrid or electric vehicles to follow on from the policy that was agreed at the last council meeting. And also there's a spending commitment of £780,000 on the pantomime, Could we have some clarification as to what the duration of the contract is?
Okay, did the relevant Cabinet member get that?
Yeah, I'll provide information on both those in writing.
Written answers? Yeah. Written answers, Councillor Dugmore? Yeah. Right, thank you. Any other questions of Cabinet members? No? Very good. We move on. We go back now to item 9, and our chief officers will vacate, and Anthony Lowe, the deputy monitoring officer, will take their place. Okay. Yes. All right, this is the appointment of the Chief Executive, and I invite the leader, Councillor Davis, to propose the recommendation.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And firstly, thank you to those members who spent some time with us to interview those candidates who were shortlisted. I'd like to thank Councillor Evans, Councillor Overton, Councillor Reid and Councillor Tomlinson for spending the day with us talking to candidates. We had a fantastic response to the national adverts that we put out in the media, with over 50 people requesting recruitment packs. In the end, 12 people applying for the vacancy, and we were able to shortlist that down to 4 people that we interviewed. Mr. Speaker, it's my great delight to say that the unanimous recommendation of the panel was that David Sidaway should be our next Chief Executive. Mr. Speaker, in the report, agenda item 10, there is a number of interim arrangements that will need to take place with regards to the head of paid service role, the local returning officer and the national returning officer, and until such a time that David Sidaway is able to join us permanently. But, Mr. Speaker, many of us will know David Sidaway as somebody who was with this authority and promoted significantly throughout the years, and then left us 5 years ago to go on to pastures new, where he sought and gained a promotion to City Director, the equivalent of Chief Executive at Stoke-on-Trent Council. And I'm delighted that he's applied and has agreed to come back. Mr. Speaker, this borough is going to go at pace in terms of the improvement. We have a 4-year plan to protect, invest and care for this borough, over 100 pledges to deliver upon, and it's absolutely important that we have somebody to take us to the next level, both regionally and nationally. And I have no doubt whatsoever, and I personally endorse David Sidaway as that next Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. Seconded.
Thank you, Speaker. After reviewing the recommendations of this report, I'd like to welcome the appointment of a new Chief Executive on behalf of the Conservative Group, and also accept the suggested interim arrangements be put in place until the successful applicant is actually in a position to take up his post. Firstly, I'd like to comment on the interview process for the post, which I thought this time round was robust and provided 3 very strong and able candidates. Speaker, I believe that the successful candidate, Dave Sidaway, will bring to this council a greater dynamism, a greater forward-looking perspective. And as a consequence, the Conservative Group look forward to this council stepping up a gear from the underachievement of previous years. On commenting on the remuneration package, it is a lot of public money, and we all expect great results from that level of investment. And while remaining with that package itself for a moment longer, I'm also very pleased that the Council's leader has finally and at long last accepted my view that the role of returning and registration officer should be part of a normal Chief Executive's role and not attract extra pay on top of a salary. I've long argued, as he well knows, that the possible 20k plus tax-free paid by the government over potentially a 4-year period directly to a returning officer should come directly to this council. And I, for one, am glad at long last that he's finally agreed with me on that issue. However, in returning to the appointment, as I've said, I personally have no doubts whatsoever from the decision we're about to make that both changes and results will flow in the months ahead. And I want to wish the new Chief Executive, David Sidaway, well and offer our full support where possible in the challenges that lay ahead. I think it's good news for the authority in general. I think it's good news for the borough and local residents in the borough. And we are ready to play our part and help in any way we can with Dave's appointment, and willing to assist, of course, in the future development of the borough. Thank you.
That is seconding the motion, yes? You didn't use the words.
I didn't, yes,
No, there was lots of
seconds
other,
the motion.
There was lots of other stuff, but yes. Right, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Tomlinson.
Candidates, thank you. We have some very good candidates. It was actually quite humbling, actually, the amount of people that really want to come and work for this council. And we already have a good reputation out there, and I think it could even get even better. And I think David Sidaway is the right Chief Executive to take us to a better place than where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You want us to come back? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to pick up the points made by the other leaders of the groups. First of all, just in respect of the local returning officer fees, it was a custom and practice that this group inherited in 2011 when the Chief Executive that Andrew appointed, Mr Brownlees, also received additional payments. So it was difficult to break that custom and practice, but it was a negotiation that was right for us to have. In regards to going places, Mr Speaker, I welcome the future council meetings where party politics will be left at the door, and that the opposition parties will embrace the work of this council as so clearly articulated in the 4-year plan, and Mr Speaker, that we can come together under the new leadership of the Chief Executive and the renewed mandate that this Labour group has to deliver for the people of Telford Wrekin.
Right, thank you. We will now move, assuming there are no further comments, we will now move to the vote. Sorry? Oh, well, once the leader had replied, I thought that was the end of it. Did you have a quick comment to make, Councillor?
Quick comment. As per normal, I am sick to death of finding out things from the Shropshire Star. 54 councillors are on email. Why did they not get an email as soon as you made your recommendations so that they knew what was happening? So
all right, thank you. We will note that. Communication is the answer to everything. Right, agenda item 9, page 3, recommendations 2.1 to 2.6 inclusive. All those in favour, please show. Right, there's no dissent, no. That is unanimous. Right, thank you. And I'd like to use my position also to welcome Dave Sidaway as our Chief Exec and invite Jonathan Etoff and not Clive Jones. Who's the other one? Jonathan Rowe back in.
Senior moments.
Well, I am knocking on.
Oh, well, no.
Right, so we now go to... Oh, we better let them back in first.
Yeah.
Don't tell them I forgot one of their names. Right. Okay, he's been appointed, by the way. It's been agreed. Right. Item 11, questions. Councillor Ian Fletcher, you have tabled a question. Do you want to come to the lectern, or...?
At the last meeting of the Health and Adult Care Scrutiny Committee, Corin Ralph from Telford CCG, when I asked about the merger of Telford CCG and Shropshire CCG, advised members that it was not a merger, but the two organisations were working together. Could the Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care please advise members if the two CCGs are to be merged? Thank you.
Right, thank you. Wait there, because there might be a supplementary. Councillor Burford? Yeah, you'll turn it on. You could use Councillor Tomlinson's. He hasn't.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Fletcher for his question. It gives me the opportunity to explain where we have reached with this issue. Strictly speaking, it isn't a merger, rather the dissolution of two bodies and the creation of a new one. In other words, what you and I might call a merger arose by any other name. Yeah. So members will know that this council has opposed the centralising approach implicit in the creation of this new single CCG, which we fear will diminish local accountability and give insufficient recognition of Telford and Wrekin's separate identity and particular needs. We have argued that what is happening is more than just an administrative detail and is a significant change that requires full public consultation. What is more, this is against a background of massive cost savings and cuts that both of the current CCGs, and Shropshire in particular, need to make to get their growing deficits under control. What price Telford in this scenario? Now, it is true that the NHS long-term plan wants to see what is called strategic commissioning taking place across a wider footprint, aligned to sustainability and transformation plans. You've probably heard of those, STPs. In our case, that's Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin combined. And we recognised that some things are better commissioned in this way. For example, acute care and certain specialist provision. However, the NHS long-term plan also recognises the importance of place and the value that local authorities bring in developing effective integrated primary, community and social care services for their communities, and the positive impact that this can have on a person's well-being. To this end, we already have our own integrated place partnership up and running here in Telford and Wrekin, and already proving its worth with good working relationships between the local authority, the NHS and all of our partners. We believe that this partnership should be at the centre of any plans moving forward, with services being commissioned and delivered by the council and its partners, unless there is a good reason for a particular service to be commissioned across a wider area. We are currently seeking to gain acceptance of this principle, but time is short because the two CCGs must present an outline of their plans to the NHS by the end of September. If approved, they will be put in place by April 2020. Meanwhile, we continue to argue for proper consultation on the merger plan and the way in which the new body will operate. We keep on the table all options for resisting what is proposed if it is not clear how local accountability will be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. The supplementary question, Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Recent reports in the Shropshire Star say that Telford CCG has a deficiency of about 4 million, but Shropshire is 40 million, likely to raise up to 76 million. Could the Cabinet member give members any indication of will the resources apparently used in Telford at this present time not be used to pay off the debts of Shropshire? Thank you.
I think that's an important question. I mean, clearly, it won't be presented in that way. They wouldn't want it to be seen in that way. But if you bring two bodies together and they've got debts of this size, and incidentally, the Telford CCG one is likely to go above the figure that you mentioned. But if you've got those debts, then joined together in this new body, you've got to address those debts. So everybody suffers as a result of that total debt. So they will say that there are savings to be made on some of this strategic commissioning. In other words, the big stuff around hospitals and acute care and all the rest of it by combining into one body. But that is effectively what happens already. The two CGs jointly commission that work. So your question is very pertinent. I fear that this will mean that we will be worse off in Telford, and that's why we're taking the line we are on this.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just let him get back to his seat. Right, thank you. Right, we now have a notice of motion. Councillor Stephen Burrell, would you like to propose the motion?
Thank you. The intention of this motion is to provide a clear, unambiguous statement of this council's commitment that not only the very best level of service be the expectation of residents for those who provide private hire vehicle services within our borough. In Section 10 of the 2015 Deregulation Act, government sought to streamline the process whereby operators and drivers of private hire vehicles could attain a licence to provide their services. This Act, while doubtlessly well-intentioned, served alongside the proliferation of web-based systems and app-based systems in particular to dilute the degree to which local authorities could influence the standard of private hire vehicle transportation available to their residents. While I am not widely known in this chamber for any great desire to progress towards greater accretion of state regulation on many fronts, the provision of basic services upon which many vulnerable residents depend falls significantly within that umbrella. The umbrella where a change of regulation is undoubtedly necessary in order to ensure the safety of outcomes for users within our borough and beyond. This will no doubt come as old news to members who will be aware of the Local Government Association briefing debate on the future of taxing private hire vehicles, PHVs, given at the House of Commons on the 18th of July 2017, the key message of which included councils must be able to take enforcement action against any driver operating in their area. A taxi and PHV licensing reform bill must also look at measures to ensure drivers are working in the area where they are licensed. And there needs to be a national minimum standard introduced for taxis and PHVs to align licensing and safety standards across the country while retaining local flexibility for councils. The Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Licensing Protecting Users consultation published in January of this year went some way to addressing these shared concerns. I have not seen a response from this council, but feel sure one surely will have been given. We asked the council to write to the Secretary of State for Transport requiring an anticipated date for government to build upon this consultation, amend legislation and issue a draft taxi and PHEV licensing reform bill. That is not to say that the council must wait for legislation to come forward, of course. The draft strategy consultation document offered guidance proposals on the licensing of PHVs, the overwhelming majority of which the council is already compliant with. We thank officers and members, of course, for their hard work and diligence in this regard, and ask that council commit to becoming fully compliant with all the guidance proposals. In the absence of national standards regulating the taxi and PHV sector, we ask that the council commit to working with neighbouring local authorities to develop and adopt a common set of sectoral minimum standards, following on from which we would ask the council to seek development of a reciprocal approach with those local authorities regarding enforcement and taxi and PHV licensing. Our residents should be able to expect the journeys they take in taxis and PHVs to accord to a basic standard that the drivers of those vehicles receive training and support commensurate with that standard. By holding the government to account, by being fully compliant with the most recent guidelines, and by working with local authorities to build a commonality of standardisation and enforcement, we can demonstrate emphatically to all residents that their council, this council, our council, is doing everything within its power to ensure their journeys in taxis and PHVs are both agreeable and safe. I'm fully well aware that these requests are somewhat wide-ranging, but I would hope that this council can find it within its wit to support them. And I commend this motion to the chamber. Thank you, members.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tim Nelson, you wish to second?
Speaker, I will second the motion. If I may reserve my right to speak, though, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Councillor John Thompson.
Our local company, Diamond Taxis, they provide an excellent local service. Most of the drivers have been driving for many years. My only concern is drivers coming from Wolverhampton, which haven't got the local knowledge and experience, and they are coming to our area. I would agree with this motion, and I will be supporting Steve Burrell. But my only concern is if it goes to Parliament at the moment, Parliament is sadly closed. With that in mind, can Steve Burrell contact the MP for the Wrekin? Because the majority of the time we never see him. Even members of the Wrekin Labour Party knocked on his office, and sadly, once again, he wasn't there. So if he can pursue that with Mark Pritchard, wherever he is, because we never see him, thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Overton. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The administration are fully supportive of this motion. I'm happy that the Conservatives are now supporting us in lobbying the government, as most of these issues have come out about because of the Deregulation Act of 2015, as Councillor Burrell stated, which created cross-border hiring. Prior to the Deregulation Act of 2015, private hire operators were only permitted to subcontract jobs to another private hire operator licensed by the same authority as themselves. Following the deregulation, private hire operators have been permitted to subcontract jobs to another private hire operator licensed by any local authority in England and Wales. This is called cross-border hiring. In practice, a private hire operator can hold a licence, for example, with Telford Wrekin, Shropshire and Wolverhampton. Those local authorities will already have control over those operators because they are licensed by them, but they will not have control over all the vehicles and drivers operating in that local authority area. For an example, members, a booking will be received for a job in Telford by an operator licensed by Telford Wrekin Council, and that job could be lawfully subcontracted to the private hire operator's base licensed by Wolverhampton City Council, who in turn will be able to either dispatch a Wolverhampton licensed vehicle and driver or subcontract a Shropshire licensed vehicle and driver to undertake that work in Telford. Telford and Wrekin Council have been active in lobbying government for a change in legislation regulating private hire vehicles and drivers. This council has on numerous occasions written to the Minister for Transport outlining our concerns on this matter. We believe that lawful cross-border hiring should be stopped. The last letter he requested our two Conservative MPs attend a meeting with the Minister, with myself and representatives of the Holly Project. If you are able to push, because they're in your party, for this meeting, that would be helpful. Here in Telford and Wrekin, in order to protect our public, we have robust standards in place for both licensed vehicles and drivers. These standards are not always mirrored by our neighbouring authorities. Here are some examples. Telford and Wrekin Council licensed drivers must undergo driver awareness training before being granted a licence. This training incorporates CSE training, disability awareness training, together with the do's and don'ts of being a licensed driver. Shropshire's licensed drivers only receive raising awareness of safeguarding children and adults with care and support needs training. Telford and Wrekin Council licensed drivers must take and pass a council-approved driving test before being granted a licence. Wolverhampton licensed private hire drivers do not take a council-approved driving test before being granted a licence. There have been numerous examples of applicants failing this council's driving standards test and subsequently being granted a licence by Wolverhampton City Council. Therefore, we have the ridiculous situation of a driver who has been refused by Telford Wrekin Council still being able to work in Telford. There have been at least two examples of Wolverhampton licensed drivers driving the wrong way down the Eastern Primary. Telford Wrekin Council licensed vehicles must have a minimum 34% light transmittance to all rear windows so that passengers can be seen inside the vehicles. Shropshire Council do not have a light transmittance policy, and except for licensed vehicles which have windows in accordance with manufacturer's specifications, which are often too dark for passengers inside the vehicles to be seen from outside the vehicle. Similarly, Wolverhampton City Council will license vehicles with factory-fitted privacy glass. Yes, yes, it's very important, though, Mr. Speaker. And recently we have had a case in point where a driver licensed by Telford Wrekin purchased a vehicle which did not meet this council's policy relating to tinted windows, and he has now submitted an application to Wolverhampton City Council. We believe there should be national minimum standards and a national policy for enforcing those standards. I also believe that licensing authorities need more powers to go alongside any changes in legislation, as licensing officers have to wait for the police to be available to do any exercise and to assist in the enforcement of licensed taxis. It would be great if funding could come with any changes as well, as we're not allowed to use any licence fees to recover enforcement costs. Yeah, but clearly there is a need for enforcement, and we clearly want our residents to be safe and trust that the taxis they get in are safe too, as well as having a responsible driver at the wheel. This has always been our priority, and it's such a pity that this Conservative government helped tie one hand behind our back with the deregulation bill. So let's work together to make these changes happen.
Thank you. Sorry? Yeah, I've got Dugmore. Councillor Dugmore. Councillor Nelson, I'll bring you after Councillor Sahota, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This motion is a bit of a no-brainer, really, especially in light of the borough having the attention of the media spotlight regarding safeguarding. I appreciate that unless there is a consistent, enforceable and practical procedures and systems in place across all licensing authorities, and ensuring the safety of passengers in private hire vehicles will be a challenge due to vehicles registered in one authority operating in another. One potential solution, as we've heard, would be to have national licensing standards, which I think should be brought in as soon as practically possible, and this will ensure consistency and should be enforceable by the police and other enforcement officers. However, we are where we are, and until the parliamentary Brexit paralysis has been resolved, such solutions may be somewhat in the future. What we as an authority need to be doing is to ensure that all the powers available are utilised, and that the public know that if a vehicle's licensed in Telford and Wrekin, they have the reassurance that the vehicle and driver conform to the highest possible standards. This authority should make it a condition of the licence that, as well as the training, there's CCTV in there, the DBS certificates are prominently displayed, and there's information available similar to Uber, so that passengers have reassurance and can let friends and relatives know where they are at any one time. But the important thing is that we as an authority need to actually advertise this and make it very clear that these are the high standards that this authority insists upon. Now, this may reduce some of the number of vehicles registered with the authority initially, but any company that had all its vehicles registered with Telford and Wrekin would actually have a competitive advantage over other companies. And I think over a period of time, people would actually be looking out and making sure that they only used Telford and Wrekin registered private hire vehicles. I'm certain, as with most cases, as we've heard, that we see terrible cases in the press, that a few bad apples are actually spoiling the reputation of a whole industry. However, the safeguarding of our residents is a primary concern, and we can't fail to take the necessary action. We can't compromise this, and I think we should support the motion as fully as possible.
Right, and thank you for keeping to the time limit. Councillor Nelson. Oh no, was it Councillor Sahota next? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I totally agree with what is at the heart of this motion, and that we should, the council should have much greater control over our taxi services, and to ensure that our constituents receive the best possible services from our local taxis, and that the taxi operators and the taxi drivers receive a good training and support from the council. However, there is one issue which local taxi drivers are always bringing it to my attention, and this is the overwhelming number of taxi drivers. I know this is not in the wording of the motion, but I thought since we are discussing the taxi issues, I better mention it. As we all know, there are a large number of BME taxi drivers in our borough, and I know quite a few of them, and their complaint, number one complaint, or the gripe always is, why is it that there are so many taxi drivers in the council? And I always tell them, and I know exactly, you know, my answer always to them that there is nothing that the council can do, that it is the government's statutory law. That we cannot prevent the number of, whether it's a 200 or a 2,000, we cannot ask put the numbers on it. So we cannot limit the number of drivers in our borough, and if we do, then of course somebody will take us to court, and then we know what's going to happen. So it's a free trade, market forces. More competition there is, the better it is for our constituents. And I hope the taxi drivers who I met over the weekend in my local pub, and they were putting up that point to me when they knew that this motion was coming, and this is what I told them, and I hope they understand that. And the reason I mention is because I thought we should all be aware of this, the taxi drivers' complaints and the gripe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Right, Councillor Nelson, you reserve your right to speak. Any more?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second Councillor Burrell's motion. I reiterate the express purpose of the motion is to unify, not divide, and it may have succeeded. Which seems like a actually fairly novel experience for me. I'm new, only 4 years, but to have so far from the speakers some unity is very refreshing. We have an opportunity before us, not a threat. We can make things better going forward, not criticise the past. The motion asks 3 things of the Council: to request the Government to hasten its response to the recent consultation on statutory guidance, and to introduce legislation to guarantee a conformity of best practice for private hire vehicles across the country. Each council has its own licensing regime, have you heard from many members, but not all hires have to be within county currently, only proportion. And the leader himself drew attention to this in his own address, and I thank him for that. The council already meets most of the statutory guidance. There may be opportunities to go further than current practice, such as look at mandatory CCTV or enhanced DBS for PHV operators. Secondly, to commit the Council to continue its good work in the training, development and support of drivers and operators. The Council already requires, for instance, CSE training, as Councillor Overton alluded to, and this is very good. I note, for instance, that taxis did come up in discussion about the inquiry's terms of reference. I add no more than that. And third, to commit the Council to using its current powers to ensure the very best service for every passenger and resident. The Council already safeguards vehicle integrity, as we've heard, and has fit and proper person tests for drivers, and these may surpass those of some neighbour councils. The best service for passengers and residents, and this is slightly novel, should encompass the wider environment. Taxis and PHV vehicles are a key weapon against climate change. Members may have noticed many taxis and PHVs are now hybrid, low-emission vehicles. This should be encouraged. Ultra-low emission vehicles are what's called microtransit, and that is the complement to non-fossil fuel mass transit. The current licensing policy makes no mention of low emissions vehicles, I could see, and perhaps it should not. But where the Council contracts for taxi services, perhaps an opportunity arises. Please support this motion and let us commit to even better taxi and PHV services and a better environment in the borough with a unified voice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other speakers have indicated, so I invite Councillor Burrell to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to members for their generosity. It's very much appreciated. Just coming back on a couple of points that have been made to Councillor Thompson, all I can say is precisely that a commonality of standardisation across the piece, including with, if we can possibly achieve it, with Wolverhampton, can only serve to increase the standards that residents can expect from taxis and PHVs, both within Wolverhampton and here within Telford and Wrekin. And that was the very reason that I pushed and proposed the possibility of the council working towards a shared goal of commonality of standards with other local authorities. Councillor Overton, I'm delighted that you feel that you can support the concept of common standards for taxi and PHV drivers across borders, and look forward to the administration making progress towards this goal. I did not hear a specific reference, however, confirming his support for the development of reciprocal enforcement measures with other local authorities, but I take his support of this motion as a statement of his general support for such an endeavour. Councillor Sahota, I hear his points, but the market as it is in regard to the number of taxis and PHV drivers within our borough is, as he says, a very open one. But I would rather think that the larger the demand for these services, the more successful our local economy should surely be. And I can only ask that all residents can expect an agreeable and safe journey, and I'm most pleased that he feels he can support this motion in that regard. Coming back on to a final point made by Councillor Thompson, and of course that was not to be without a certain degree of expectation. The proroguement of Parliament is a matter, as the Council will be aware, that is somewhat distant from my own pay grade. But members can be assured that I feel sure the leader of the Council will be in close contact with both of our local members of Parliament in order to engage their full, open, honest and frank support. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Go to the vote. Right, I put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please show. And that is unanimous, and that is most apposite. Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and I close the meeting. Thank you.